So we're back with Proclus with his commentary on the Timaeus. We'll start a little bit before where we ended last time, just to get back in the swing of it. So, since, however, paradigms are triple, for there is either an eternal paradigm of an eternal thing, or an eternal paradigm of a generated thing, or a generated paradigm of a generated thing. Hence, when there is an eternal paradigm of an eternal thing, that which is entirely eternal is the paradigm of that which is so in a certain respect, as intellect of soul. Just reflecting that there has to be some kind of declination with the emanation of these likenesses. So it can't be eternal in precisely the same respect. But at a higher level, you could say that, like, the one is the form of forms, and both, well, I guess, like, the one is beyond eternity, intellect is eternal, so there's going to be some kind of difference in the degree of, I guess, every quality between levels of emanation. But when there is an eternal paradigm of a generated nature, this paradigm also is in a certain respect eternal, i.e., according to infinite time. And emanation like this is also going to take place between proximate levels. So you're not going to have an unqualifiedly eternal paradigm that is directly the paradigm for something that's generated. Instead, there will be media or common terms, similar to how in the Aristotle group, the elements don't transform into their contraries immediately. So you don't go from fire to water with no intermediary. Instead, you go from fire to air to water, or vice versa. Got to hit those middle terms. And when there is an entirely generated paradigm of a generated nature, this falls off from eternity. For it is not possible that what is essentially generated should be productive of eternal natures. And Timaeus seems to have disagreed with this in thinking that physical habits, which are essentially of the nature of the world of generation, maybe they aren't essentially generated in his interpretation. Maybe there's a way of, like, reading into the physical habits of nature that Timaeus talks about, Plotinus's notion of the logoi of nature, which maybe themselves are not essentially generated. You could say they're of the nature of the generated world and are essentially conjoined with the generated, but maybe, strictly speaking, are not essentially created or generated, the logoi, or eternal or perpetual in some sense. So maybe there's not an inherent tension between Proclus and Timaeus. So never mind what I just said. Okay. The former, therefore, participate from their paradigms of beauty and order as being imitations of a stable nature, but the latter, as deriving their subsistence from things mutable and in motion, are not beautiful, and yet are not entirely deformed, but are alone manifested through the negation of beauty. Such things, therefore, as are the beautiful progeny of art, are not beautiful when compared with the beauty which exceeds from an eternal paradigm to sensible paradigms. And perhaps on this account also, Timaeus does not say that what derives its subsistence according to a generated paradigm is entirely deformed, but only that it is not beautiful. For that which is constituted according to artificial reason does not subsist conformably to an eternal form, since there are not in intellect paradigms of things artificial. I think I said last time, it's worth noting to anyone who uses one of these examples of the forms, like, oh, so there's like a form of the perfect table, etc. Like, no, expressly no, in Neoplatonism there are not forms, strictly speaking, of artificial things. Instead, the paradigms are in human minds, not in intellect. Okay, and then I also covered last time why having an eternal form for something would render it beautiful, because beauty, in some sense, is simply an abundance of form. Matter is the ugly, it is the absence of form, and the more something embodies form, the more beautiful it is. So an eternal form, being the paradigm of something, will be more beautiful than the paradigm itself being perishable. Because things are perishable by dint of their participation in matter, generation, corruption, again, as we learned in the Thomas Taylor reading, always subsists between contraries, which themselves always subsist in some kind of substrate, and that's material. And so things that change are inherently more material than things eternal, and so they're less formal, less beautiful. Hence, they are not simply beautiful, nor yet are they deformed, because, in short, they derive their subsistence according to reason, or that productive principle which is in the mind of the artist, rather. So, artificial things are not unqualifiedly beautiful because they don't instantiate pure form. It's mediated through our mind, but they are not deprived of form whatsoever. That these axioms, therefore, are true, we may, through these observations, be reminded. So now, new stuff. Some, however, doubt how Plato assumes as a thing acknowledged that there is a demiurge of the universe who looks to a paradigm. For there is not a demiurge of it, say they, who directs his attention to that which is invariably the same. So that's the claim, that there's not. Oh, my screen capture is all messed up. Sorry about that. And many of the ancients, indeed, are the patrons of this assertion, among whom are the Epicureans, who entirely deny the existence of that which is perfectly eternal. The Stoics admit that there is a demiurge, but assert that he is inseparable from matter. And the Peripatetics grant, indeed, that there is something which is separate from matter, yet do not allow that it is a producing, but that it is a final cause. So, thought thinking itself is treated by Aristotle as a final cause. Simplicius argues that actually, if you read Aristotle correctly, Aristotle does treat thought thinking itself as an efficient cause and a final cause. But Proclus is not yet wanting to integrate Plato and Aristotle as tightly as the later Neoplatonists. I don't know that there was still like an existing separate Aristotelian school as much. I mean, there would have been, I guess, the leftovers of it. I'm not sure like how much actually existed, but one of the reasons why they became more integrated and people wanted a reconciliation later on was that there just wasn't a separate Aristotelian school. So there's one kind of philosophical school encompassing Stoic influences, Peripatetic influences, and Platonic influences, and so they wanted to, I don't think inharmoniously syncretize, but recognize the commonalities. And I'm actually persuaded by a lot of Simplicius's points. Sometimes he takes it too far, and even Simplicius does recognize that Aristotle does legitimately differ on some things. So I kind of agree, though, with Simplicius's view on like how Aristotle treats the first principle, where, you know, he goes up to the level of the demiurge, and the demiurge is similar for Aristotle as it is for Plato. But here, Proclus sees a distinction between thought thinking itself and the demiurge. Hence, they also take away paradigms and place over the whole of things an intellect void of multitude. So they don't want separate forms. But in the 12th book of the Metaphysics, Aristotle does talk about kind of basically archetypes of things in the world existing in thought thinking itself. They're just in a more uniform manner. Another thing Simplicius says is that Aristotle didn't object to the forms, he objected to calling things by the names of mundane calling these forms by the names of mundane objects, because that leads to confusion. So instead, we should have, something like the categories, something, more kind of schematic and a more like properly metaphysical language to describe these thoughts in the mind of the unmoved mover. But Proclus treats Aristotle as viewing that intellectual first principle as void of multitude, and therefore kind of undermining the idea of the paradigms or forms. Plato, however, and the Pythagoreans celebrate a separate and exempt demiurge of the universe, a producing cause of all things, and a providence that is attentive to the welfare of wholes. And this with the greatest propriety. For if the world, as Aristotle says, aspires after intellect and is moved towards it, whence does it derive this desire? So arguing against Aristotle, supposedly Aristotle's position that it's a final cause, not an efficient cause. Well, if the final cause is drawing it, where does that come from? You need something on the other side initiating that desire. It can't necessarily stem from the end state alone. For since the world is not the first of things, it is necessary that it should possess this tendency from a cause which excites it to desire. For he also says that the appetible is motive of that which is appetitive. But if this is true, and the world by its very being, and according to nature, is appetitive of intellect, it is evident that the whole of its existence is from thence, whence also its being appetitive is derived. And Proclus in the Elements of Theology gives some good arguments why the end of a thing is its producing cause. The proper end of all things is that from whence they came. Whence likewise is the world, since it is finite, moved ad infinitum. For every body possesses, as he says, a finite power. Whence, therefore, does the universe derive this infinite power, since it is not from chance, as Epicurus says it is? Right. So one argument for we just covered this. I'm kind of in another group, kind of forgetting the specifics, but Aristotle says like the first principle can't be a finite body or a finite thing, because then only a limited amount of stuff can flow from it, and the universe would kind of run out of juice. So it needs to be infinite, and all bodies are finite, so it can't be a body. So he must have been arguing basically against the Democriteans in that. In short, if intellect is the cause of a motion which is infinite, uninterrupted, and one, there is something which is productive of the eternal. Okay, so if we accept the universe is moved infinitely, then it must have a producing cause with infinite, uninterrupted powers, and so it has to be exempt from body, because all body is finite. So the existence of an exempt, effectively causing or demiurgic cause of the universe is demonstrated by that, on the assumption that the universe is perpetual. But if this be the case, what should hinder the world from being perpetual and deriving its subsistence from a paternal cause? For as it receives an infinite power of being moved from the appetible, through which it is moved ad infinitum, thus also it will entirely receive from thence an infinitive power of existing, through the proposition which says that in a finite body there is not at any time an infinite power. So the cause of all things is not some finite body. Either, therefore, it has not a power through which it is connected. And how is this possible? For everything partible has something impartible which connects it, as Aristotle himself somewhere says, and the universe also is an animal. So something infinite, let's see, everything partible has something impartible which connects it. Because if it was partible ad infinitum, then body would have to have an infinite number of parts. Proclus also talks about that towards the beginning of the Elements of Theology. Okay. He therefore says that God is an eternal animal, but every animal is connected by the life which is in it. Or the universe has, indeed, a power which connects it, but this power is finite. This, however, is impossible, for if it is finite, it will fail. Or it possesses an infinite power. And again, it will not have this from itself. Something else, therefore, imparts to it the power of existing, and imparts not the whole at once. For it is not... So, okay, I think these two thoughts are loosely connected. We know that the universe doesn't possess all of its power from itself because all of it doesn't exist at once. So something that does not participate of time in the same way that the universe in its instantiated form does, has to instead grant it that infinite power of perpetually existing. So a paradigm outside of time is justified by that. Something else, therefore, imparts to it the power of existing and imparts not the whole at once, for it is not receptive of the whole at one time. Hence it imparts this power by influx. And the influx is perpetual, and always as much as the world is able to receive. So that the world is always becoming to be, and never is. But if intellect is the demiurge of the world, whether does it make that which it makes by a reasoning process, or by its very being? Okay, so is it a separate energy, or does it essentially produce the world? If indeed, by consulting, an absurdity follows. So this is an argument against a separable energy of the demiurge being the effective cause of the world. Instead, I guess we're going to argue that it is an essential act of creation, inseparable. For there will be a mutation about it, and the passions of a partial soul. It will not therefore consult. Okay, so moving between discursive thoughts is inherently a partial kind of activity for the same reason that a paradigm has to stand outside the world, because the whole of the cosmos doesn't instantiate at one time. That means the cosmos instantiated is not as encompassing as its paradigm. There's something limited or partial about it compared to its paradigm. And so here, if the demiurge deliberates and thinks differently at different times, then there's mutation about it, and the demiurge becomes like a partial soul, which he kind of says is like absurd. I guess the absurdity would be that it produces, of course, the whole soul, the world soul, and how could that which is partial produce that which is whole? It will not therefore consult. And if it should consult, it must entirely antecedently assume in itself the work about which it consults, just as everyone does who consults before he energizes. But if it makes by its very being, it makes that which is similar to itself. And if it does this, it will contain the paradigms of the things that are generated. And again, we must investigate whether these paradigms subsist primarily in it or not, and whence it derives this paradigmatic cause of wholes. Farther still, after what manner do we see artificers that are here after what manner do we see artificers that are here produce? It is not by possessing the reasons, or rather, is it not by possessing the reasons or productive principles of their effects? This, therefore, the daimonical Aristotle will also grant. But if art imitates nature, it is necessary that nature, much prior to art, should contain the reasons of the things which she generates. And if nature does this, we must inquire whence she is moved and whence she is perfected. For she is irrational, and thus ascending, we must say that the causes of all things are in intellect. Okay, so why nature is said to be irrational? I guess because, as we've said before, all things of generation subsist from contraries, and there's a war between contraries at all times. I guess at a deeper level, like there's a kind of Neoplatonic justification of something like Heisenberg uncertainty, because matter is the privation of form. Things, subsisting in matter are inherently not totally formally determined. There has to be indeterminacy and incompleteness. In fact, they call the first positively existing matter not the kind of hypothetical but not actually existing archetype of matter, but the first level of the substrate, the fundamental building block of nature, which they do recognize. They call that, or Simplicius does, the indeterminate quantum, which is interesting. So nature, then, related to matter, is irrational. So to find these paradigms, we shouldn't look to something irrational, just like, again, by analogy, we look to that which is rational in the artist to find the paradigms for his art. So thus ascending, we look beyond nature for the causes in intellect. In opposition to Aristotle, indeed, much has been said by many, but our business at present is to explore what Plato says. So he's kind of raising the fact that he could quarrel with peripatetics about some of these particulars all day, but let's stick to Plato. In the first place, therefore, let us investigate from what cause he introduces to generated natures the beautiful and the not beautiful from the paradigm and not from the producing cause. It might then have been said that there are twofold demiurgic causes, viz., the generated and the intelligible, the latter being effective of beautiful things, but the former of things that are not beautiful. But Plato does not speak after this manner, but says that intelligible paradigms are the paradigms of beautiful effects, but generated paradigms of such that are not beautiful. So it's not twofold demiurgic causes, and demiurgic cause, as we saw last time, is basically efficient cause. Properly speaking, efficient cause is synonymous with demiurgic cause. So it's not that there's twofold demiurgic causes, there are twofold paradigms. There are generated paradigms, as we observe, are like blueprints for a house, come into being and go out of being. But that doesn't mean that there's a twofold demiurgic or efficient cause. Twofold paradigmatic cause. It may, however, be said that what is here asserted contributes to erudition, exhorting us not to reject beautiful actions. For if he had said that what is generated is not effective of beauty, perhaps he might have rendered us more sluggish with respect to beautiful actions. Perhaps it will be better and more physical if we say that it is possible for the same effective cause to look to twofold paradigms and to make a certain thing beautiful and a certain thing not beautiful. Same efficient cause, but two different paradigms. For soul, looking to intellect generates truth and science, but looking to generation, she procreates imaginations and passive appetites. But it is impossible for the same paradigm to be the cause of beautiful and not beautiful effects. Very properly, therefore, it is asserted that from this cause, beauty and deformity a seed to generated natures. Twofold paradigm. As the paradigm, however, of this universe is beautiful, it is evident that it is intelligible and always subsists invariably the same, because of the kind of identity of beauty and form, to which also the demiurge looking adorns the universe. If, therefore, it is the supplier of beauty, it has the highest order among eternal beings, and belongs to the first intelligibles. Okay, so it's not clear how he concludes this, other than the idea being that that which causes beauty is the form of beauty, and the form of beauty is one of the highest levels, or one of the highest forms. I forget where that's said, but we've read before somewhere or other that beauty is up there among the highest forms. Of course, there are like the principal forms, the form of the same, the different, being, and beauty is probably somewhere after all that stuff. But it's in that realm of the intelligibles, not the intellectual nature like the demiurge. And of course, we have intelligibles and intellectuals, and then intellectuals, also known as the being, life, intellect phases of the second hypostasis. So we're talking the first phase of the second hypostasis for the paradigm, and the third phase of the second hypostasis for the demiurge itself. If, therefore, it is the supplier of beauty, it has the highest order among eternal beings, and belongs to the first intelligibles. Hence, the cause effective of beauty is there, through which all things are beautiful, intellect, soul, and the nature of body. Again, therefore, the demiurge indeed is the cause of form, but the paradigm of beauty, and the good of union. Okay, interesting. So he's saying that the demiurge is the paradigm of beauty, but he also is saying he looks to another. So somehow this is going to be a both and solution, where the paradigm of beauty in some respect is beyond the demiurge, and in another respect is reflected in the demiurge. And in fact, that's how he clarifies it in the Cratylus commentary, right? Where the demiurge is described as basically collecting together all of the various paradigmatic causes into a more unified intellectual reflection, and then that acts as the seed, just like in the human body, right? We hold all of the triangles together in our bone marrow, and that concentrated gathering of all the material productive principles allows for the diversity of the body and the material elements in us. But from the other side here, the demiurge gathers together all the forms into a unity and then multiplies them in the next hypostasis of soul. But we should pay attention to this statement here. Again, therefore, the demiurge indeed is the cause of form, but the paradigm of beauty and the good of union. Perhaps because it's through the demiurge that all these higher things are filtered to us. So, like, although the one is the cause of the goodness and unity of things, ultimately, we receive that proximately by things that are closer to us. I guess that's the idea. And the last of these supplies all things at once, but the paradigm is the supplier of beauty and form. So the last of these, the good of union, is all extensive because the one is the highest thing, and what is highest permeates to all things. What is slightly lower permeates to many things. What is lower permeates to some things and fewer things. That's known as Proclus's rule. And the last of these supplies all things at once, good, but the paradigm is the supplier of beauty and form, again, the synonymy of beauty and form here, and the demiurgic cause, so far as it is intellectual, of form and essence. Form and essence versus beauty and form. I guess, the efficient cause supplying the substance of things, like creating them, the creative act, whereas the paradigmatic cause that the demiurge mediates for us is the supplier of beauty and form in a higher sense. So I think the creation of substance is different than the supplying of form to a thing, although they're obviously related. Moreover, the demiurgic cause, looking to the intelligible, is multiform. Okay, so moreover, the demiurgic cause, looking to the intelligible, is multiform. For the whole demiurge fabricates in one way, looking to it. He, therefore, is united to it according to supreme transcendency. But the demiurgic triad fabricates it another way. And of this triad, indeed, the first, i.e. Jupiter, fabricates uniformly. The second, Neptune, generatively, and the last, Pluto, convertively. And in one way in the ruling, in another in the liberated, and in another in the mundane order. Okay, so the way in which the demiurge looks to the paradigm is manifold. The demiurge of wholes looks to the intelligible and fabricates through it, mediates it to us in one way. Each of the elements of the demiurgic triad looks to the paradigm and mediates in another. And then the demiurge acts in the ruling, liberated, and mundane orders of his attendants in another way. So the various entities, gods, in the train of the demiurge, supplying efficient cause to the universe, themselves mediating between the demiurge and us, that's kind of included in demiurgic fabrication, demiurgic action here. And ultimately, of course, even we will be kind of agents of the demiurge and take part in the creation of the world through procreation, through building a house, etc. But after this triad, we must survey fabrication proceeding after a different manner to the many demiurgic gods, who from these receive and are allotted paternal powers. Okay, so this manifold way that the demiurge creates just is on a continuum, basically, with the many demiurgic gods that are in his attendance, who from these... from these, the triadic demiurgi, who from these receive and are allotted paternal powers. Yeah, so again, they just mediate the demiurge, the many demiurgic gods in attendance. And I think I have a Proclus commentary still here. I had it on this table for a long time, but I don't. It has, the translator put this chart that gives all the different orders. It would be helpful to review that, but some other time. Okay. After these, also, it proceeds in one way to demiurgic angels. So we're looking at the demiurgic gods, of course, beneath the level of these gods that are in attendance, including the younger gods. We have angels, daimons, etc., that are in attendance. And since, Socrates, for example, sets himself in the train of Zeus in the Phaedrus, we know that even human souls can also be kind of broadly in this train. After these, also, it proceeds in one way to demiurgic angels, but in another to demiurgic daimons, the attendants of this order. Farther still, we must likewise survey the undefiled forms of life which contribute to the demiurgic series, and the genre of partial souls which follow the demiurgic choir. For the peculiarity and the mode of production and of looking to the intelligible extend differently to different natures as far as to these. So the way of making the nature of demiurgic causation extends as far as to partial souls. And then causation underneath the level of these partial souls that have rational archetypes of the things that they make, beneath that level, we don't, properly speaking, have demiurgic causation or efficient cause anymore. So material things bumping into each other are not, strictly speaking, efficient cause. They're really just concomitant. There's no true cause. As far as the billiard ball view of causation. It is also necessary to admire this in Plato, that he does not say that what is generated on account of an eternal paradigm is beautiful, but that what is generated by the demiurge who looks to it is most beautiful, since that which is confused and disordered is generated, for it is visible and sensible. Okay, so he didn't go with that thought where I thought he would. I thought he would say that, like, only the, like, superlative craftsman looking to the superlative archetype creates the most beautiful. The defective craftsman, even when he looks to the most beautiful paradigm, does not create the most beautiful image. But the actual thought, concluding, was, since that which is confused and disordered is generated, for it is visible and sensible. But everything of this kind is and was generated, as he says further on, receiving from the intelligible certain vestiges of forms prior to fabrication, and is not most beautiful, though it is in a certain respect beautiful, as with reference to the formless nature of matter. Hence, that which is generated on account of an eternal paradigm, such for instance as that disorderly and confused nature, is not simply beautiful, but that which was generated by the demiurge looking to it. So nature as a whole is in the image of the intelligible animal, but it is still disordered, confused, formless in some respects. But the demiurge doesn't create the whole of the natural world, even though the whole of the natural world is in the image of the intelligible animal, because the whole cosmos is an animal. But it wasn't all created by the demiurge so what does the demiurge create? And then what do other gods create in humans? What is the thing that the demiurge actually creates in us? From the text of the Timaeus. I want to say that it is what is immortal in us, so that would be down to the level of rational soul, but nothing beneath that. Okay. Nature as a whole is not simply beautiful, but that which was generated by the demiurge looking to it. For from that confused nature, the demiurge was absent, but the intelligible prior to the demiurge illuminated that disorderly essence. Just illustrating again Proclus's rule that higher things emanate their effects lower than lower things. So the one is reflected in matter, even if form is not reflected in matter, because oneness is higher than form. But the intelligible prior to the demiurge illuminated that disorderly essence. So far, however, as it was generated by the demiurge, it was also generated by the eternal paradigm, energizing on it through the demiurge as a medium. And so far, indeed, as it was generated by the paradigm, it was invested with form, but so far as by the demiurge, it was arranged. So the form, whenever the demiurge creates, it's always according to a form, a pattern. But whenever things are invested with form, it's not necessarily demiurgically created. The demiurge has to engage in that arranging of the thing, construction of the thing. For the demiurge is the cause of order, but the paradigm is simply the cause of form to its participants. So this is a technical sense of the term order. I wish this might be taxis, actually, as the Greek. But anyway, we should remember the demiurge is the cause of order specifically, and that's differentiated from form. Order, I guess, involving the particular arrangement of the multiple formal elements in a particular, and that's like the craftsman's task. So the craftsman doesn't generate all the formal principles that he's using, but he does arrange them and order them. Farther still, from the paradigm itself, the difference of demiurgic powers may be assumed. So the differential demiurgic powers that we've just looked at, operating at different levels of the demiurgic train, can be surveyed in the paradigm itself. For some of these powers, indeed, looking to the whole of intelligibles, produce according to the whole of them, but others produce partially. And some, that which is manifested differentially by different demiurgic agents is there seminally in the paradigm that all of them are looking to. And some, indeed, survey the whole of intelligibles through union, but others through intelligence. Some, again, do not produce according to the whole of the intelligible, but some are divided according to the four primary causes. Others proceed into a greater number, and others make the last forms the paradigms of their productions. Hence, through these, there is one shepherd of men, but another of horses, as Plato says in the Statesman, and in a similar manner in other forms. Interesting statement by the pagan Proclus, there was one shepherd of men. I think he means, like, in the sense of the statesman, like the political leader, not the one good shepherd. Hence through these there is one shepherd of men but another of horses, because if it was interpreted that way in this statement, Proclus would be saying there's like a divine incarnation of the horse that is like the salvific horse for horses. So obviously he doesn't mean that, as Plato says in the Statesman, and in a similar manner in other forms. As the demiurgic series, therefore, is various, and there are different paradigms of different things, some of which are more total, but others more partial, Timaeus very properly does not say that he who uses this intelligible paradigm makes that which is generated to be beautiful, but he who uses a paradigm of this kind. Okay, so there's not necessarily just one in some sense there is one paradigm, the intelligible animal, that all of them are looking to, but in the intelligible animal there is a multitude of forms of paradigms, and different demiurgic causes look to different aspects. So it's not like they're all looking to one and the same substance. They're looking to multiple substances under the series of the monad of the intelligible animal. So in some sense, they're all looking to one form, the one monad, but in another sense, they're all looking to different participants in that monadic series of the intelligible animal. In the intelligible paradigms, therefore, the part is in a certain respect the whole, on account of the union of intelligibles. And the multitude is most similar to the monad through the domination of sameness. So, as I was saying, in some respects, even the parts are the whole, so they're all looking to the whole paradigm, because the part is in the whole, or the whole is in the part, especially in the intelligible natures, which are more unitive than things divided, which we perceive here, but not unqualifiedly. Since also the whole demiurge looks indeed to the intelligible and all perfect animal, but employs the paradigm which is in himself, possessing intellectually the intelligible, which paradigm also is such as the intelligible through similitude to it, but is of a more partial nature. Hence, Timaeus adds the words a certain to a thing of this kind. So a certain thing of this kind, meaning the intelligible animal, but is the monad of the series of paradigmatic causes that the demiurgy look to. But a certain thing is specifically referring to the intellectual image of the intelligible paradigm, which is in the mind of the demiurge himself. So that's the sense in which he was going to investigate how is the demiurgic cause operative. Is it from the demiurge in himself, or is it the demiurge looking to something beyond? And the answer is both, in different respects. For these intelligibles participate of the eternal paradigm and are more partial than all perfect animal. Right. These intelligibles in the mind of the demiurge, I think, here. Hence, too, he calls idea T, a certain thing. Let me see. I might have to just stop. We're almost at the end. I'm just going to rush through this, sort of. Assimilating that which is generated to the paradigm. But fabrication imparts essence and powers to the things that are generated. Why, however, of eternal being does he say, employing a paradigm of this kind, but of that which is generated, he no longer adds the expression of this kind, but instead of this adduces the but instead of this adduces the term generated. Employing a paradigm generated. We should go back and look at the quote to be real accurate with it, but we'll just go on. Is it not because the intelligible has something similar to itself as having the highest rank, but that which is generated, being the last of things, has nothing else similar to itself? So instead of saying of a paradigm of this kind, we're looking at the last of things. For that which is produced, or the last of paradigms, for that which is produced on account of it is generated, and to this the dissimilar is appropriate, but to the intelligible the similar, the same, and everything of this kind is allied. Okay, so there also we have the general theme of the war of the same against the other, the similar against the dissimilar, the circle of the same, of course, like in the Platonic language is the fixed stars, the circle of the other, I guess, is the planets, the moving stars. But here we're not looking at that dichotomy. We're looking basically at the generated world versus the Proclus gives it multiple meanings. So the war described in the Atlantis narrative, on the one hand, is the intelligible versus the sensible. On another, it is the celestial versus the sublunar. So that is like the generated, strictly speaking, and the perpetual. And so, anyway, we have this war between similar and dissimilar, and we have here the beauty coming from the similar of this kind, and then in the rephrasing having to do with the generated paradigm, we no longer have the similar being mentioned, indicating otherness. I think referencing this highest level kind of war of opposites described in the text. And thus much concerning these particulars. But the term always must be conjoined to a subsistence according to sameness, in order, so explaining these particular words in the lemma, always is associated with the intelligible paradigm. It has to be conjoined to a subsistence according to sameness, in order that there may be that which looks to a nature always possessing a sameness of subsistence. For thus the philosopher Porphyry properly decides. For Timaeus does not say that the demiurge, in fabricating all things, always beholds, as Atticus thought, but that the intelligible always subsists after the same manner. So always grammatically is attached to subsisting in the same manner, not beholding, according to Proclus and Porphyry. Unless it should be said that on this account he assumes the beholding always, lest by seeing at one time, but at another not, he should latently introduce into his production that which is not beautiful. Okay, the demiurge, therefore, looks to that which is eternal in order that he may produce that which is similar to it and beautiful. And the general thoughts here are all, I think, pretty clear. Any thoughts from the Jitsi call on the reading today? Okay, we're starting a new quote next time, which is good. Makes it a little bit easier. So we'll pick this back up next week. Thanks everybody for listening. Take care.